Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today, we have Nishan Taneja, Senior Director of Product Marketing, and also Anna Paul, Senior Product Marketing Manager, joining from Barracuda, joining us today. Before we get started, please be reminded that these sections will be recorded, and you will receive a copy of the recording about this time tomorrow. If you have any questions, please type into the question box, and we will get to it after the sections. And if you're interested in any previous and upcoming webinars, you can go to our event page at barracuda.com. And now I will turn it to Nishan and Anup.
Thank you, Carol. Hello, everyone. This is Nishan Taneja, and I'm joined here with Arnab Paul. We're really excited to be here with you today to talk about enterprise email security and how the threat landscape has been evolving over the past decade, especially in the recent years. And talk a little bit about protection beyond the gateway and what it means, and then dive into the Forrester Wave for this year. Forrester, as many of you may know, is a leading independent research firm that covers technology areas, and this is their first report on enterprise email security, where they talk about the different vendors in the space and give some insights on their offerings and talk about their strategy and really have a scoring mechanism where they identify the leaders that are in the enterprise email security space. And as we go into today's session, would be really happy to answer any questions you may have about the report. We're looking forward to having that conversation. So I'd like to begin a little bit with the evolving threat landscape and talk to you about how we're seeing here at Barracuda in speaking to customers and prospects, the email security landscape, how it's been evolving. There has been an increased complexity and risk over the past decade, and here we're talking about 2000, so the previous decade. And we've seen, and as many of you may know, that it really began with the content filtering, inbound content around spam and malware, where there were malicious payloads and virus, and there was a lot of attention given to these spray and pray type of tactics from a security vendor's point of view, and in terms of protecting at the gateway layer and how to make that protection more effective. And since then, there's been an evolution in terms of how attackers have become a lot more sophisticated. If some of you may remember the Enron crisis that happened around the mid-2000s, and how that really changed how regulation came into being, and the threats from a compliance standpoint, and much higher scrutiny on email. And since then, there's been attackers always trying to be one step ahead, and there were these zero-day attacks that really became more effective and tried to circumvent the gateway, but the gateway protection, email gateway protection, continued to enhance, and security vendors worked on improving the ability to really thwart some of these attacks. More towards the later part of the past decade, there was a lot of focus from attackers' perspective on phishing, and that became really the impetus for them really became around monetization. So phishing became more mainstream and leveraging brand impersonation. So looking at some top brands out there and how the bad guys really started to think about leveraging those brands to launch these types of phishing attacks. Enter this decade, this sophistication and in terms of risk and complexity continues. We've seen that monetization around ransomware, where you have the ability to attackers were able to, get hold of data or, private information, financial, or it could be something more personal around within the organization on employees or executives, and being able to hold that ransom. And that's been something we've seen a lot happen both on the commercial side as well as on the government sector as well. Most recently, I think you may have heard of a lot of the cities and that are being the attackers are really targeting a lot of the government and state and local government, and I believe Baltimore, Atlanta, some of these cities were really targeted more recently. So ransomware continues to be, a problem, and the evolution then continued into spear phishing, which is really something we'll talk about in today's webinar. Social engineering types of attacks that are much more sophisticated. They don't carry a malicious payload. They don't have malicious URLs, and they're able to really appeal to the vulnerabilities of employees and executives and really circumvent the gateway. So business email compromise is one example of that. And account takeover, we're starting to see also is on the rise. And we'll talk to some of this in today's webinar. So as we look at some of the trends, we've also seen a rapid move to the cloud from an email security perspective. And security in general. So, it remains a big concern for a lot of organizations out there. And as they're migrating their business applications and enterprise workloads to the cloud, there's certainly a huge sense of urgency to ensure that there is, security that's available in the cloud as well. So as that happens, there is still a concern with many organizations around cloud and how that's really coming into play, and are the solution vendors out there that are offering email security in the cloud? Is that security sufficient? So I'll pass it on to Arnab for a quick polling here and get your thoughts and perspectives on this.
Yes, hi. As you know, the Office 365 adoption continues to show an upward trend. So the first question for you today is, what % of businesses cite security as the biggest blocker for Office 365 migration? We'll give you a minute. There are 4 options. Please submit your responses. Thank you.
So as we're getting some of the responses from you, from the audience, Office 365 Microsoft has really been pushing Office 365. We're seeing some impressive growth rates there. You may be considering Office 365. You may already be on Office 365. But we're certainly seeing that as a big driver in terms of organizations moving to the cloud and thinking about security differently. And with respect to these advanced threats, thinking about, how do you bring in better, more effective layers of protection beyond just the gateway. And so we're certainly seeing Office 365 migration as a big driver of that. So let's take a look at some of the results that we have. Thank you for your responses. So really interesting. We do see majority of you finding that it is over 20% in terms of security being the biggest blocker for 365. Several of you also see it's, call it as 37%, which is the largest number that we had here. And for those of you who did, you're absolutely correct. We have, according to Gartner, 37% of businesses claiming that security is the #1 blocker for Office 365 migration. And this is a report that came out earlier this year from Gartner. And the scenario really is for Office 365, there's a huge adoption that we're seeing in the market, over 50% year-over-year growth in terms of organizations continuing to adopt O365, move from hosted or on-premises email to Office 365. Email is clearly the #1 capability on Office 365, and the email security needs are becoming more and more important in terms of organization evaluating that. Is that sufficient? Is Office 365 offering the right level of protection as you think about moving to the cloud. However, we are hearing from both customers and generally from prospects, and we're seeing a lot of these analysts like Gartner talk about it, that the native security in Office 365 is not sufficient to provide you the protection against some of the advanced threats like social engineering attacks that we're seeing become much more prevalent today. And in fact, even Microsoft really talks to how third-party solutions really help provide multiple layers of protection on top of O365. So we know that email is really thriving, and unfortunately, so are advanced threats. And we talk about, in terms of percentage impact or what majority of attacks are emanating from email, it continues to be, a significant percentage. So it is the #1 threat vector, and many of you on the webinar today would probably be, are maybe experiencing that, and unfortunately, this continues to be the case. So it's really important to look at that #1 threat vector and think about your security posture and differently, and in light of today's advanced threats, how do you really protect against these advanced attacks, and do you have the right level of protection as you move to the cloud? And a lot of these social engineering attacks, you may have heard many of these terms, but spear phishing clearly is the largest category, and account takeover, as we talked about earlier, is continuing to become more and more prevalent, unfortunately. And Microsoft, many of these account takeovers really happen on O365, where the bad guys are able to get in and penetrate these accounts, and then being able to launch, once they're within the ecosystem of the organization, they're able to launch these attacks from those users' mailboxes that have been compromised. Brand impersonation is, I believe there was a study that we did just earlier this year, which found that majority of the brand impersonation, the brands that are being impersonated are so the top brands like Microsoft, which I believe was 1/3 of all brand impersonations, are leveraging Microsoft O365 or SharePoint or some application to really get hold of credentials of the users and then launch these attacks. So that continues to be a problem. Business email compromise, also synonymously known as CEO fraud, where you target executives for some financial, bad guys really target executives for some financial gain. And these emails don't contain any malicious links or payloads. This is purely appealing to the vulnerability of these executives and being able to, drive some economic gain from that. Ransomware, we covered earlier. And then more recently, we're seeing blackmail and also synonymously known as extortion. These types of attacks are becoming more and more prevalent as well, unfortunately. So it's a new landscape. It's these social engineering attacks that gateways weren't really built to really address. And so email security posture really needs to be thought of differently, and you have to think about the strategy that you're executing on around email security differently.
And yes, now we have the second question for today, poll question. As you know, business email compromise losses have been showing an upward trend, and they've been growing significantly. And the FBI recently published a report on that. So the question for today is, what's the estimate of global losses from business email compromise attacks for 2013 to 2018? If you could make an estimation, we have some options for you. Thank you.
Thanks, Arnab. And as we get your responses and your thoughts on this, this is clearly a staggering problem, and FBI has tracked that over the last several years. We continue to hear from our organizations that are approaching us and talking to us about Barracuda solutions. This clearly is one of the bigger problems around social engineering, and there's a lot of money that's lost, unfortunately, with respect to these attacks. So let's see what you all think in terms of the estimates here. Interestingly enough, we have certainly it's in the billions, so you're absolutely correct. It's not in the hundreds of millions, it's in the billions. and we seems like we have a tie here in terms of 1.2 billion and 12.5. And it actually is the larger of those two numbers. So we have 12.5 billion according to FBI that's lost globally, and this number also continues to go up. So what does this really mean? We're looking at spear phishing attacks that represent either a malicious URL or some kind of a the spear phishing attacks that don't have malicious URL or payload representing 74% of the attacks. We have business email compromise that we talked about, $12 billion impact globally. Account takeovers on the rise, like the triple-digit increase year over year. And blackmail continues to be a new threat that we're also tracking. And we have our solutions that are protecting against some of these threats, many of these threats. So this landscape is actually pretty scary when we think about and what this really means is that you have to be rethinking your email security posture. And clearly, some of you may be feeling the pain of these advanced threats. And you're thinking about, okay, what do you do if you're on Office 365? What do you do if you have on hosted Exchange and you're moving to Office 365? How do you really protect against some of these attacks? And those are all valid questions that we'd be happy to talk to you about. So it's really time to go beyond just the email gateway for the reasons we just discussed. These social engineering attacks, with respect to these attacks, traditional security is not sufficient. Traditional security is really good at being able to provide, reputation filtering, being able to, provide protection against content filtering, protection against zero-day types of threats, and malicious payload and malicious URL. But it's really, really hard when these threats are simple emails that are through a compromised account. The attackers are launching internally and targeting executives, and it's very hard. Gateways are not able to detect, the body of the email or the subject line and senders, and so you really need a new level of protection, a new way to think about email security. So these social engineering attacks are circumventing the gateway and getting into corporate inboxes. So we have really thought about at Barracuda differently and really innovated around this and looked at security from a multi-layer perspective. And at the most fundamental layer, gateway defense is super important. You absolutely need that, and when you look at inbound or outbound security, when you think about encryption, DLP, archiving, absolutely critical, absolutely important as a fundamental layer of security for you. But as you go beyond that, and in light of these threats, there's resilience that you need. The cloud backup to ensure that your data is protected. You want business continuity in case there's a downtime on Office 365, which we've seen happen more often than not. And what's on top of resilience is this what we call inbox defense, which is leveraging AI, artificial intelligence, for protection against social engineering attacks, being able to have some strong level of account takeover defense, and being able to also, as organizations, protect your brand from being leveraged for impersonation attacks. So DMARC reporting becomes super critical. And, technology is just one aspect of this. You need to really, we believe, organizations, they really need to think about people as well. Security starts with technology, but really is rounded out with people and thinking about people. So security awareness training for your employees, ensuring that they are able to detect and bring to IT's attention some of these spear phishing attacks. Having that level of education and awareness is super important. So we have a solution around this, which offers phishing simulation and training. And lastly, but not least, is this forensics and incident response. We're finding this is a growing area of need for organizations being able to discover, investigate, and remediate attacks that do slip through, and being able to then respond in an automated fashion that saves IT a lot of time and doesn't consume a lot of bandwidth. If we think about attacks, many attacks can consume hours and maybe even days per attack of IT's time. And how do we, how can we enable organizations to make that more automated and bring that time back to you? So that's how we approach email security in a holistic fashion, and we call it, defense in depth, and being able to offer products that provide across these layers of security. We have 4 products that are able to provide that total email protection. So Essentials is our fundamental gateway layer and resilience layer for email security. Sentinel is our new innovation around inbox defense, and we'll talk about Forrester report and what they said about our solution and Sentinel. And then Fishline is our security awareness training solution, and we round that out with forensics and incident response, which offers you the ability to discover and remediate attacks in automated fashion and saves you a lot of time with just a matter of few clicks. You're able to address a lot of those problems. So that's really our portfolio. And we certainly don't want you to take our word for it. It's great, as you do your evaluation and looking at solutions, reports from independent research firms and analysts become super important and gives you the ability to really do your due diligence and research. And we're really excited and proud to share with you that just most recently, I believe this was about a few weeks back, Forrester, which is a leading independent research firm, produced a inaugural report on enterprise email security. And they looked at several vendors, solution providers in the space, and did very strong due diligence on the 2 areas. One is on the strength of their current offerings. So they looked at our total email protection solution, and also started to also asked us a lot of questions and did their due diligence on our strategy in terms of how are we, how are these solution providers innovating? What's their product roadmap and vision when it comes to email security? Are they offering future-proof solutions? What's the strength of their offerings with respect to each of these areas around, inbound, outbound security, spear phishing protection, security awareness and training. So it's a very in-depth kind of scrutiny that they apply to this report. And then they score vendors on a variety of criteria across these 2 axes that you see on the slide here. And position all the solution vendors as either leaders, strong performers, or contenders and challenges. And we're really excited and proud to have been named by them as a leader in enterprise email security. And this really is a testament to our leadership in email security in general over the past several years, but also talks to how we're continuing to innovate in light of these advanced threats around social engineering. We wanted to share with you that they scored across multiple criteria, and there are 4 areas that they highlighted. Barracuda scores really high. One was cloud integration. So we have very strong integrations with the cloud, and specifically Office 365. We offer multiple deployment options, and they found, and they, by the way, as they look at the scoring across these criteria, they talk to a lot of our customers, and that's an important part of their evaluation. And it's not just dependent on the analysts doing the research. So they speak to a lot of customers and able to score across these criteria. Deployment options came pretty high on that score. We also have a strong incident response solution and customer success, which we take a lot of pride in that. And we're happy to see that also being called out by Forrester as a very clearly a strength area for us, where in our ability to provide support and ensure that customers have success with the solutions that they're implementing. And specifically around customers, when they spoke to customers, they talked about how many of our customers talked about how Barracuda is innovating is super important for them, and they're clearly seeing value in that innovation. Our Office 365 integration, we clearly view ourselves as complementary to Office 365 security and complement their native security and offer a product like solution like Sentinel, which actually runs on top of Office 365 and is able to catch a lot of the spear phishing, social engineering attacks that the gateway Office 365 may miss. And we actually have a great tool that I'll talk to you about that enables you to see, really use that tool to evaluate and see how many of the attacks are circumventing your gateway. And customer support, as we mentioned earlier, has been called out as a strength area for us, and our customers really like the support that we provide. Innovation specifically, as I mentioned, Forrester has called out our Barracuda Sentinel, which is our AI-based protection against spear phishing, account takeover, and business email compromise. If you recall earlier in the webinar, we talked about these three categories of advanced threats are significant. Business email compromise being, $12 billion impact, account takeovers, at 130% growth rate year over year. So we're really excited about being able to and pleased about being able to bring in a solution like Sentinel that's helping our customers, protecting our customers against these advanced attacks. And it leverages AI, it leverages our APIs with Office 365 to be able to provide that level of security. And this email threat scanner is really a great tool, and it's a free tool, and it's very easy. There's absolutely no impact from a load perspective, no network impact, and many of our customers are able to leverage no performance impact. And many of our customers are able to leverage this and this tool to find the attacks that are circumventing and getting past the gateway. So many of the attacks that we talked about, here's an example of a sample report where you can see, several attacks that are being found, and these unfortunately end up being in the hundreds. And we had a mid-market customer that had about 2,500 users, and they had, I believe, another competitive solution, email security gateway, and they found, 300 Dropbox attacks that went past the gateway, and our tool was able to detect that. Similarly, 13,000 user Fortune 500 company that found 600 Microsoft, impersonation attacks that was not detected by ATP. So very effective tool. Highly encourage you to talk to us, talk to the partner that you have the relationship with, and leverage this tool to evaluate your ecosystem and see if there are threats that are getting past your gateway. And also, very importantly, we're offering this complimentary report. It has a lot of insights on different solution vendors. It talks about the leaders, and Barracuda, has been named as a leader in enterprise email security. It gives you more insights in terms of the strengths of the solution providers, and gives you the ability to evaluate vendors and find what's the right solution for you. So please do access this report. It's available at kuda.com /email wave. And we will also be following up with you after this webinar with links to some of these resources. So I'd like to take a pause right now and see if there's any questions. So I'll pass it back to Carol, and it was really great to be able to share with you some of the insights, and would be happy to address any questions you have.
Thank you, Nissan. So if you have any questions, please feel free to type into the question box, and we will try to address it with Nissan and Anup.
So as we're waiting here, I think one of the questions we get is the email threat scan, which is a really effective tool, and in terms of implementing that scan on your gateway. So it works with Office 365. And if you're looking at migrating to Office 365, or if you have Office 365, then it's a great tool to leverage and run and see, do a scan of your environment and see if there's any of these spear phishing attacks that are getting passed. And will be, so that's one of the criteria to ensure that, you have Office 365 or are thinking about Office 365. We do get that question where I think some of you are asking, what is it compatible with and what environment does it run? Great. So thank you for joining the webinar today. We'll follow up with you. We'll share this report and also the email threat scan. Hope you found the information that we shared with you today helpful. And please reach out to us if you have any further questions. Thank you for joining today.